Hello and welcome to another opinion piece about StarCraft 2 co-op. Today I'll be talking about unpopular units and masteries that I like to use even though I know some of these aren't necessarily optimal. Perhaps you might want to try these afterwards. If you do, tell us your experience in the comments below. For Raynor, people like to talk about how weak P1 is compared to the others. On minor evac, P1 is the best prestige because the enemy comp doesn't matter. The majority of the enemies are infested and they have trouble getting through 400 HP firebats. The area around each ship is also dense, so you won't be able to fit a lot of units. Fewer but beefier units means not needing to replace so many losses. And even with P1, I use tanks against Outbreak and BCs against Rifts. Just because B1 is a bio prestige doesn't mean I can't make mech units. I also learned a new opening that starts with 8 Marines versus Rifts despite being P3. It's much better to kill the Rifts than to mass repair a bunker for a minute and a half. And on Dead of Night, even when I use P3, I mass tanks. I don't actually get any air units until like after 15 minutes. I need those tanks to survive. For Kyrian, I like to use P1 versus Missile Command. Many players would rather mass Omega Worms and let nukes hit ones that are away from the action. I prefer to mass Hydras and patrol them. My army is usually just Kyrian plus a handful of Ultras. I also like to use Mutas versus Props. Some people think that's dangerous, but they're actually better than Hydras and Lurkers. For Zagara, I sometimes put points in Roach Drop to kill Marines or to use Roaches to clear encampments. Most people just put 30 points on Baneling damage, which is okay most of the time. However, sometimes I'll set it so that my Banelings will do just enough damage to kill the enemy in one volley, and the rest of the points will go into Roach Drop. For Vorazun, I unironically add Centurions to my DT Corsair Oracle army. By having Centurions, enemies that have lost their detectors won't continue walking. They will stop to attack the Centurions, giving my DTs time to finish off the stragglers. It's much better than having to blink backwards just to catch a few units. For Karx, I often use Chrono Mastery with P1. That means I can't open with a fast Nexus, but this mastery choice also serves as a damage buff. Usually Chrono Mastery is useless, but since it does more than just lower build times here, I use it. For Ather, I often use Guardians rather than Mutas. Mutas are just so fragile until they get enough biomass, whereas Guardians are usually in the back dealing damage uncontested. I also often get Tunneling Claws for my Roaches when using P3, which by the way, I use very often. Comment down below if you're a P3 enthusiast who wants a guide on this. On minor evac, I use Tunneling Roaches as energy batteries for my Vipers. For Alarak, P1 is all about Wrathwalkers, so I use Combat Unit Mastery rather than Alarak damage. I also use Vanguards against Outbreak and on Dead of Night. They're not very good anywhere else. There's a lot for Nova. P1 Bio against Missile Command is very good. You could just repair the regular damage and use Seeker Missile on the nukes, but with P1 Bio, you can just patrol Marines and let them do their thing. People say that Hellbats and Marines are useless. Well, they're good for base defense against Void Rifts, and against Heroes from the Storm, Liberators are the main damage dealers, so I use full Combat Mastery then. I also use 15-15 against Rifts and on Dead of Night, so Sabotage Drone can one-shot 500 HP Rifts and Huts. And I use Max Heal Mastery against Void Rifts, very good for healing up the early game Marines and the Banshee hit squads. For Stukov, I make Barracks first even when using P1 when facing Rifts. It's much better to get rid of the first Rifts with infested Marines rather than repairing a bunker until 4 minutes. Also, Banshees are not bad units, they're just overshadowed by tanks and Diamondbacks, but they're still good for sniping objectives on Rifts to Core Hall or Scythe of Amon. For Phoenix, I make Invisible Disruptors versus Terran on Chain of Ascension. Terran doesn't send detectors in the center, so Disruptors can prevent Janara from getting pushed back even when the rest of the army is elsewhere. For Daka, I always use Gene Mutation Mastery even when using P3 against Rifts. Apparently, the attack speed isn't impactful enough to make a huge difference, and later on, the main damage dealers are the combat units. Also, I make Primal Igniters, the upgraded Roaches, on minor evac and Dead of Night to help out in the early game. In addition, I put 2 points in Pack Leaders, so that Mervar gets to release one more set of creepers before she leaves. Greater Primal Worm Mastery is more useful in general, and putting 30 points in Pack Leaders is overkill. Pack Leaders generally do everything they need to do in their 1 minute of uptime. For Tykus, I like using Cannonball and Rattlesnake. This combo is very good, especially on Tempo of the Pass. These two can hold down an entire lane in the late game, even when Hybrid constantly whack them. For Zeratul, I actually use the Avatar of Form from time to time, usually when massing cannons because I don't have units to take advantage of the aura. I also sometimes use the Avatar of Essence just to devolve enemies in a base once, knowing that the Avatar will get focus fire. The devolved units will leave the area and go towards my base where my defenses are, leaving that area mostly empty. I also sometimes use Combat Unit Mastery against Void Rifts because the hit squads can take out rifts a bit faster. Lastly, for Stemman, I don't rush Super Gary. In fact, I put 20 points in Steadolite Mastery because there's really no need to get Super Gary as soon as he comes out, even for P2. It's much more important to expand and get hardened shields for links. Regular Gary can handle the early game by himself, probably up to like 6 minutes. Are these opinions really that unpopular? Comment your thoughts down below. And while you're here, why don't you check out this other video about units that I hate using? See you there!